Hi, this is Judy from Fox Cities Quilt Company, and this is Sunday from the Sewing Room, where we give you some tips, tricks, and a few tutorials to help you with your sewing and quilting projects. And if you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button below. Today I'm talking about binding. I get a lot of people that come in the shop and they get their projects done and they ask, now what do I do? How do you do a binding? And so I'm going to show you a real quick tutorial on binding on something small like this table runner. This is a table runner that we did out of a border print from Lewis and Irene, and we had to calculate our own binding and figure out how much to put on, and I'm even going to show you how to calculate your binding, and here's how I do it. So to calculate my binding, I am going to take the length of my project plus the width of my project. And this table runner happens to be 42 inches long. And let me make sure that you can see that. And plus the width is 18. So that equals 60 inches. And if I take that 60 inches and I times that by 2, because I need it to go all the way around, that's 132. So plus 12 inches, and the reason we need 12 extra inches is because we make a little tail so that we can put our binding strips together so that it looks nice, and we want a little extra to work with. So if I add on, oops, this is wrong, it's 120, plus my 12 inches is 132. Sorry about that, I jumped ahead. And then if I divide it by 40 to get the number of strips that I need, the reason I divide it by 40 is by the time I take the selvage off my fabric, I feel like I comfortably have 40 inches to work with. So if I divided that 132 by 40, I get 3.3 strips. So, and then I need to round up because I want to make sure that I have absolutely enough fabric. You know, quilters, we always like to give ourselves a little wiggle room. So I'm going to take 4 strips because it's rounding up from the decimal. And then I am going to make this binding 2.5 inches wide. So 4 strips times 2.5 inches. And I'm going to do a double fold binding. That's 10 inches of fabric. So now, again, because I'm a quilter and you go to the quilt shop and they're probably not going to sell you 10 inches of fabric, but they would sell you 12 inches of fabric, which is 1/3 of a yard, to bind this table topper. So now that I have my fabric calculations, I am going to cut 4 strips at 2.5 inches wide. So as you can see, I have all 4 of my strips cut, and I used my Stripology ruler, and I just have this much fabric left. I'm not going to throw this out because I'm going to use it for another project for another Sunday from the Sewing Room that I'm going to show you soon. But now what we have to do is we have to put all of these strips together into one long binding strip. And then to do that, we're simply going to take it over to our sewing machine, right sides together. I don't bother to cut the selvage off because I'm going to do that anyway later. And I'm going to sew from corner to corner, from this corner to this corner, and then it will flip over and make one long strip of binding. So we'll take you over to the sewing machine and we'll get that done. So now, as you can see, I have one great big long strip of binding. It just goes on for over 132 inches. And when I sewed corner to corner, when I flip this open, it's a nice bias look, and it's really difficult to see once you get it pressed, and I will show you this. So now what we want to do is when we do our binding, I got a twist there, is we're going to cut this extra off. And you want to cut it 1/4 inch away from your seam line. If you want to, you can just take scissors. I generally do. I just eyeball it 1/4 inch. And then I cut those little tails off even with the edge of my binding as well. And I will just go ahead and do that for all 3 pieces. And it goes really quick. You can use your ruler if you want to. I don't mind eyeballing it because nobody's going to see that. That's a little thick there, but And then here comes my third piece. And I am going to snip that there. And off here and off here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my iron and I will press this seam open so that I won't have bulk underneath my binding. And then I'm also going to press these wrong sides together so that we have a really nice double fold binding. I'm all ready to put my binding on my quilt. I folded or pressed this wrong sides together. And remember I told you to press those seams where you put your binding strips together open. I'm going to get to one here. Here it is. I see it was so nice I couldn't even find it. And I pressed that open and this is now nice and flat. So when I put a binding on, I usually start on the longest side of my project. So for this table runner, it's going to be this 42-inch side or 40-inch side. And what I do is I make sure that I leave a tail. I folded my project in two so I can kind of find the center. But I make sure that I leave at least, here's where that 12 inches comes in. I leave at least a 12-inch square. And what I like to do is I like to use my little binding clips to clip it on, or my little Wonder Clips to clip this on. They're easy to get off that way. But I'm going to start clipping, and you want to clip or pin, whichever you prefer, or if you're not a pinner, you don't have to pin at all, so that all of my raw edges are out. I am pinning this on the back because I am going to machine bind it on the front. When you machine bind, you kind of have an excellent opportunity to maybe use some of your decorative stitches. So I'm going to continue to pin this on or clip this on all the way down. And I am going to sew all the way to this edge, and I'm going to leave a 1/4 inch from the edge and stop stitching right there and maybe take a back stitch. So this clip is about a 1/4 inch wide. So I am going to leave that right there so I know where to stop stitching. So I have this at my sewing machine right now, and I am going to start sewing right here. And then you can see it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I still have my fancy laser light on. And I am just going to keep stitching this. And I pull these out as I go. And another one. I wanted to show you when I get all the way down to the end. And I'm sorry about the bouncing, I went too fast here. And just a little further. And I am going to put my finger right there and stitch about a 1/4 inch to the end, a little bit more. And then I'm going to take a little back stitch and I'm going to cut my thread. So now I want to make a nice mitered corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my project 90 degrees so that you can see it. And then I am going to flip this up so that it is even with my project. Let's see if you can see that. So it's nice and even with the edge. And then I'm going to fold it back down on itself and see how that corner is nice and mitered, and you can see the crease under there. The reason I left that 1/4 inch unstitched is because now I'm going to stitch over the top of that so that you have a beautifully mitered corner. And I'm going to keep going all the way around and to all 3 sides. So I finished binding and I've given myself plenty of room in between in order to be able to put these binding strips together. So this is where I started and this is where I finished, and you can see that I have all this binding strip left. Again, I'm fine with that. I'm going to save it so that I have, because I have another project in mind. So what I'm going to do is I am going to fold this over right here, and I'm going to give it a finger press because I want to make sure that I have a straight edge with which to work. So I finger press that, and then you can see the crease in there, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to cut that off in a nice straight line. So I'm going to save this because I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with that. And then what I want to do here is I want to get my binding strips so that they're almost touching, not quite touching. There's like an 1/8 of an inch in between both of those. And you remember that little strip of fabric that I just cut off? Well, what you need to do is you need to cut this tail strip off, not the blunt end strip, but the tail end strip off the same width as your binding. And if I fold this open, then I have, without having to drag out a ruler or anything, I have the width of my binding right there. And I can either eyeball it and pin it and clip it, or I can just come along here and mark it with my friction pen, and then I can just clip it off. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to go to my sewing machine, and I'm going to flip this open, and then we're going to bring this together, and we are going to sew, and I always have to think about this, from here to the outer corner, and so that your binding will flip open exactly perfectly. I'm going to take it to my machine and show you how I do that. Okay, so I sewed that from corner to corner, and then if I straighten out my binding, you will see that that works exactly perfectly. I got 2 seams coming together here, but this fabric, it's so hard to tell. But now when I go to I'm going to cut this extra tail off. I'm sorry about the fumbling and bumbling. And again, I'm just eyeballing it 1/4 inch away. And then I want to press that open too. And I'm just going to finger press it just like that so that you can see that now it lays nice and flat with that method. And then I'm going to finish stitching from here to here. So I finished stitching it from here to here. And now when I flip this over, I will have a nice, smooth, beautiful binding in order to finish this quilt after I get this thread out of here. But I want to show you how cool the corners came together. Let me move these things. So now when I stitch, when I fold this over and then I fold this other one, look at that beautiful mitered corner. That's going to look so nice. Now, because I make so many quilts, I put the this on the back, the binding on the back, stitch from the back, and then I will top stitch it on the very, very edge from the front. And I do that just because I just don't have time to hand bind all of the projects that I do for the shop. So I'm just probably going to use a decorative stitch. I have a binding foot and stitch this down all the way around. Thank you for watching our binding tutorial. This is Judy from Fox Cities Quilt Company. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.